Let your fire burn. Let your fire burn.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us again on the Porcupine Perspective, the show where Robert and I take a look at politics, philosophy, and current events through the lens of individual freedom and liberty. On today's show, we are going to follow up our previous episode on what is anarchy and what are the ethics of anarchy. Now, before we get too deep in there, I do want to take a moment to give a shout out to our sponsor, Strikeforce Energy. It's an energy supplement that can be added to any beverage of your choice. Now, if you're like me, it's January, you're seeing the inside of the gym for the first time in a long time. So not only is Strikeforce free of any sugar or calories, but it is packed full of that kick some ass necessary to help you keep your resolutions. Visit them at strikeforceenergy.com. Use promo code NOMORECANS. You'll receive 20% off your order. Now, Robert, you had an article that just came across the wire as we're recording. Did you want to go into it?
In correction, I guess, now, or an addendum, I should say, to the previous episode in our discussing of what you have
Captain
deemed
Caveman?
Captain Caveman. Yes. Apparently, they've drafted a resolution for the declaration of a national emergency order. In the event that he doesn't get his way for the wall, it looks like $7 billion will be allocated to him via emergency measure means. So there you have it.
Now, I wonder if he's going to use this as a stick to go, you either give it to me the right way, or I'm going to use this, or if this is a done deal, I am going to invoke national emergency powers, and I'm going to build a physical barrier on the southern border.
I would say it's just, okay, well, if you don't give it to me this way, this is what I'm doing.
And I think, if I remember correctly, the extension or the reopening of the government only went through mid-February, somewhere there's about. So I don't know if there's going to be a time table on this, or if this is a deal that he's going to try to push through as early as next week. I guess time will tell.
Does it even matter?
No, I guess it doesn't. I would much rather see of the two options, and I don't want a wall. Obviously, we've beaten that to a bloody pulp. But the thought of this president invoking national emergency powers terrifies me, because it's not just for a wall, guys. They can use this to suspend the Constitution. They can use it to seize private property. Basically, it says you've got all these protections that are enshrined, at least in your mind, that are enshrined in Washington to keep your government off your back, and we are going to wipe our asses with them.
Yeah, anything, they can take or do anything impeding their way of the construction of this monumental structure. I would say don't get in the way.
Yeah, they can declare the martial law. The Japanese internment, that was done in this manner.
Mm-hmm.
That they can suspend the entire constitutional protections. And if that doesn't terrify you, I'm not certain what should. Well, maybe this topic probably should terrify you. At least it terrifies me a little bit, but we're going to get involved in it. Those of you that have not been living under a rock have heard about Governor Cuomo in New York signing a law that allows late-term abortions up until the moment of birth of a child. Now, Robert started it out in our last episode about the stance that we have as voluntarists. Obviously, we can't tell anyone what they can and cannot do with their body, including this. Now, keep in mind, what we personally believe for ourselves and our families and our own personal actions are completely separate from this, because we do not have a right to tell someone else what they can and cannot do. And even more so than us not having the right, we especially do not have the right to pay someone to enforce our will on you. And that's where it gets really bad. So I've gotten a lot of flack from this. So I fully embrace it when it comes to this, and if it comes to pass, it comes to pass. But I agree with this law, but I do not agree with the action. First things first, I don't want the government involved in making these decisions for anyone. It should be legal. Now, does that mean I want it to happen? Absolutely not. And let's be honest here. If someone has carried a unborn child for 2 trimesters and they're getting into the last trimester, the likelihood of them wanting to perform an abortion goes down significantly, I would argue. Are there some out there? Absolutely. But the law in and of itself is not going to prevent that. Anyone that suggests that the law prevents crimes from happening has obviously never driven by a prison. The lights are always on the prison because it's full. Laws stop nothing. So if we accept that the law making it illegal is not going to stop it, from a practical standpoint, let's look at it from a moral and an ethical standpoint. If someone is committed to actually performing this act, and again, it's an act that I disagree with, and I imagine Robert would disagree with.
Indeed.
I would much rather them go to a hospital where it would be legally performed than go to Hanger Harry's. And let me explain why. At the illegal place, it's going to get performed and it's going to be done. Whereas at a hospital, they could have someone on staff to hopefully talk the mother out of it. Maybe a psychologist to make sure she's not depressed before they go through with it. And I'm not saying it has to be that way, but those are my hopes. And lastly, my hope would be that the hospital, viewing this child as something that could actually survive, would say, hey, why don't we go ahead and induce you and then allow the child to be given to some families that are looking to adopt a child. That will never happen if it's illegal. Never, ever, ever, ever happen if it's illegal. But there is a small chance, at least, on this side of it. Now, for a lot of people I talk to, they think this sounds like I'm being an animal, and I'm not. I don't agree with it. And even in a voluntary society, like the one I would envision, I could see very much where this a person that went all the way through with this and killed the child being removed from society. Everyone else going, we no longer want to associate with you. And I would support that. I absolutely would. So I don't want you to think I'm trying to make light of it, but I do not want the government involved. First. Number 2, practical standpoint, being illegal is not going to stop the action. Number 3, in the event that this was going to happen, I would much rather it be done at a place where there is a chance that they could save the child, or at least provide another option for the expecting mother. Is there anything you wanted to add to that or disagree with?
A couple caveats, just for clarification's sake. Sean is using anarchy and voluntarism as synonyms.
Mm-hmm.
Just to explain that to folks who might not otherwise know. The other one being the stance where community might shun the individual. Obviously, there's differences for emergency situations and stuff like that. But once again, this isn't a law or a legal thing. This is, just people choosing whom they want to associate with by whatever, standards that they deem they want to live by and want to associate with others by. Because once you start getting into that, then it starts a little bit sounding like almost like a law. Not that you intended it that way, which I know you didn't.
No. It would definitely be a freedom of association. Just like, you live in a small town and you find out somebody is a prolific liar or a cheat. You don't associate with them. You don't say hi. You don't nod. They don't exist. And they're basically shunned out of society. Not saying that it would, come from some entity going, this person shall therefore be banned. Nothing like that at all. But it would just happen that the society I envision would go, look, yeah, yeah, we don't want to associate with you anymore. And we're not trying to make light of this situation. And one of the metaphors I like to use is it's like pulling a parachute. If we consider bedrock the pure principle, just pure logic, no emotion whatsoever, and you're falling out of an airplane and you've got a parachute, I pull my chute right before bedrock hits. I stick to the principle as far as I possibly can, and unfortunately sometimes that forces me into the unenviable position of looking at that bedrock face to face, knowing that what I'm saying bothers me, but I cannot allow my personal emotions to dictate the actions of others. Now, for me, even talking about it, it is a tear-jerking idea that somebody would go this far. It is. It even bothers me to talk about it. But again, the big key here is I can't force you to do what it is that I want, and I sure as hell can't pay somebody with guns to threaten you if you don't do what it is that I want. And I guess that's the end of my piece on that. The other thing that you were talking about when we ended up the last episode was assisted suicide. Was that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I've got a similar stance. It's not going to be nearly as controversial as this last one, but you should be allowed to die. If you want to die, you should be allowed to die. Now, notwithstanding, obviously there's some mental health issues out there. We want to provide as many opportunities as possible for someone to get help and not end their life. And I'm going to make the argument again, if it is not illegal, if they can seek out professional medical help to end their life, do you think it would be more likely, or don't you think it would be more likely, that those doctors that are getting involved would make sure that it's not just an issue of temporary depression, or that there's not a pill that they could take, or there were any other options? Whereas the alternative, if it is completely illegal, and don't take this the wrong way, they're going to find the nearest 12 gauge and they're going to take care of the problem.
And not being sexist by any means, men are going to be, typically be the ones to, grab for the 12 gauge or the firearm. I'm just going by statistics. And women are going to be, the type that are going to, go ahead and use the prescription drugs and overdose on those, or whatever they can find like that.
Well, men are just messy. So I guess it speaks to it.
They figure they don't have to clean up. All right.
Sorry,
enough.
guys.
So, but with a, with a brick and mortar location, instead of, operating fly by night, if you will, as it was in the case of Dr. Kevorkian, people will be able to go and set up their appointment, if you will, and, the doctor could, if he wanted to, it's his right to, just require a small counseling session just to see, if he can help out or whatnot. But, if a person did not want that counseling session, then obviously they could go to somebody who would not require it or has it as optional. And, in that case, we could have some hope that, a person might decide otherwise. But if they don't, and they want to go through with it, then that's absolutely their right, and they can do it under, a proper medical environment, and things will, they can go ahead and pass peacefully. This not only helps the person for that short experience, what it might be, but it also would help the family, as in they don't find, their loved one that has decided to do this, find them in a mess, which will, greatly improve the grieving process, if you could put it that way, without some, grisly or ugly scene.
Not to mention the fact that if it was legal, then there's probably a greater likelihood that they would say goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to, I'm going to go do this and I can't tell anyone because they'll commit me to a mental institution. I can actually say goodbye. It's like, hey, I'm in constant pain. I'm in, whatever the case may be, and say goodbye. And then again, like you said, hopefully help with the grieving process, if it can be helped at all.
Yeah, leave a more open goodbye for the loved ones, if, in the case that an illness is not immediately going to take you or this type of thing, where somebody, dies in the night from, some affliction and folks don't get to say goodbye, this way they wouldn't be depriving people of that ability.
That's a good point. All right. I'd say let's move forward to this non-aggression principle that we hold dear. This is the second of the tenets after self-ownership. Non-aggression means exactly what it states. You cannot initiate violence. You can absolutely defend yourself, but the initiation of violence is not allowed. I guess basically it comes down to this. I do not have a superior claim to another's body or property. Therefore, I cannot harm either against that owner's wishes. Because if I intend to do you harm, that means I have a higher claim than your claim to own your own body. If I am choosing to steal from you, that means I have a higher claim to your property than you do. Would you agree with those?
And I guess what I would make an addendum in there for is self-defense, where I'm not quite sure how to state the idea so that it sounds proper, so I'll just say it. When somebody aggresses against another as an initial action, at that point, I would say they have given up some of their right to self-ownership for the fact that the person can wield self-defense against them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You are absolutely allowed to defend yourself, and I agree with you. I think that you forfeit yourself, your own personal self-ownership in proportion to the violence that you're doing. If one of the straw man arguments I hear all the time is, so what happens if if one of your leaves fall from your tree and lands on your neighbor's front lawn? Can they launch their tactical nuke at your house and kill you, your wife, and your kids because you have now aggressed against them? Obviously not, guys. So this appeals a lot more to common sense than that, I would hope. And anyone making an argument like that, I would accuse them of intellectual dishonesty of the highest order. The idea here is that we don't go around killing and stealing from each other. It's pretty simple. We all have claims to our own property. We have claims to our own lives. Anything other than that, if you're in violation of it, then you forfeit in the same amount your own personal claims. So, with this in mind, would taxes be a violation of the non-aggression principle?
Essentially, it is, because the end result has been seen by businesses in years past, where you have armed individuals coming to collect.
Yeah, and they're not there for shopping purposes. They're there for thieving purposes. My apologies.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that would also follow through with aggression through coercion. A person essentially making you do something, or making you make a transaction, or dealing with a particular entity exclusively, apart from any other entity, through means of coercion. And there's many different forms of coercion, and their results, the results of them can be, equally as real or painful as physical harm.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything. One of the big things, and you'll usually know if you're talking to someone in the freedom movement, you'll hear is taxation is theft. Taxation is theft. And it absolutely is. It is no different from me walking up to you and telling you to give me 30% of what's in your wallet, or 30% of what you own, or I'm going to lock you in a cage. Because that's the reality of it. And that's not being hyperbolic by any stretch of the imagination. If you choose to not give up this amount of money to the person demanding it, what happens to you? Well, you're going to eventually get locked in a cage. Now, granted, we don't have a debtor's prison anymore, but they're going to come and seize your other assets. And inevitably, you're going to end up in a cage. So it is no different than theft. And when you realize that historically, taxation has been used to enriching a very small class of people, typically nobility, kings, and of course we've had this since we've had governments. There's no other way about it. Forcing people to give up their property under threat is theft. Now, if you, let's say I went to Robert's house and I went and I stole all of his stuff, or just 30% of his stuff. He comes home, he sees it, and of course, rightfully, he's pissed off about it. But I leave him a small gift on his doorstep, a gift of something he doesn't want or need. Have I just made that theft okay? Would you be okay with that, Robert?
No, absolutely not. No would argue. You were doing pretty good if you made it back out the house past my dog.
Well, yeah, of course. You know, the dog notwithstanding. Maybe the dog likes me. Maybe he wanted to go with me. Who knows?
170
Probably not.
pounds of love.
Yeah, it's a whole lot of loving. But that's exactly what people argue makes this legitimate. The government steals money from you, forces you to give it up, but they give you a small gift. It's not really theft anymore because we're providing a service. Well, how about you just let me keep my money and I'll figure out what services I want or that I need? Yeah, it doesn't quite work that way. So go ahead.
I'm sorry. Even, providing a service that likely, in a lot of terms, you don't want.
That you don't want, you don't need, and is probably inefficient as hell.
Yeah, exactly. And, or they're not providing you a service, they're providing somebody else a service, as in the form of redistribution, which, is fantastic.
And there's nothing that irritates me more than the people that get money that have paid not a damn dime in, and they get a significant chunk of change.
Yep. It makes a hair stand up on the back of my neck. There's generations that do this, and it's all on, the taxpayer's dime. And I didn't sign up to support anybody. If anything, I want to take my money and support the people I want to support, because then I can vet them and make my own conscious decisions on who I'm going to help.
Absolutely. These are the people I'm directly responsible for. Quit taking away the resources I have to take care of the people I'm directly responsible for. So if taxation is absolutely a violation, what about laws? Let me make a qualifier here. Immoral laws.
That's even tough, but we'll go with it. Immoral laws are definitely aggression. I would also say that a overabundance of laws is a terrible aggression, because then it sets people up in a circumstance to where it doesn't matter what they're doing, somebody will charge you with something if they're looking to do it for whatever reason.
And we see that with the roving bands of tax collectors that we all have in our towns, otherwise known as the police department. They spend more time enforcing traffic laws so that they can get upsells by asking you what you did and having their drug dogs false alert to your car so that they can search it and find something that you did wrong. Yes, it's absolutely aggression. If you're not harming anyone and there is no victim, there is no crime. There's no reason for you to be detained, and there's no reason for them to instigate harm against you.
And I'd take that a step further. It's in their best interest to find something, because then they can do confiscation of your vehicle, your belongings in your vehicle, whatever. Or, whatever you might have at the time that they go ahead and arrest you. And so now your possessions are in their possession, and they determine it part of a crime, and if they have any issue with that, then they can go ahead and use this wonderful equitable sharing to involve the feds, and the feds get a little bit, and police department gets the majority, and this is a great way for revenue.
Right, and that usually involves drugs. I've seen with the equitable sharing, civil asset forfeiture is a big problem, and there's some departments that have pretty loose laws. And civil asset forfeiture, it sounds nicer than what it actually is. You're not given the option of whether or not you're going to forfeit it, and they're not even required to prove that it was used in conjunction with a criminal activity. They only have to suspect it. And there's even, I know Oklahoma has them, and there may be a few others now that have card readers that can check the balances of gift cards. And the reason why this got started is a lot of the people that were involved in illicit activities learned that if they carried a lot of cash, that would signal the police officers that had pulled them over that they were involved in criminal activities. So they began loading reloadable gift cards. Well, now they can swipe these cards and they can take everything off of it if they suspect that the money you have on there was garnered through criminal means. And it's judge, jury, everything right there on the side of the road.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds terrifying, at the very least. Now, voting, for me personally, I consider this a violation of the non-aggression principle. When you vote, you are basically taking your beliefs, your wants, and you are employing someone to enforce those on someone else. If I hired someone to go and harm you, you would consider that, even though I did not personally aggress against you, I would believe that you would hold me accountable for that action. Likewise, with voting, I hold that in a similar in a similar light. Now, Robert, I don't know where you stand on it. We haven't talked much about voting.
No, the one thing I would argue, though, is the popular vote hasn't meant a whole lot because it's the Electoral College that interprets what you thought.
Right. Well, that's on a presidential level. I'm more speaking like a local level.
Oh, okay.
Where, everyone talks about, yes, we are a constitutional republic, but not on the local level, not on a state level. And it truly is the people around you determining what is going to happen and what is right, what is wrong, or at least in their minds, and what is going to run you afoul of the boys in blue, as it were.
Mob rule.
It absolutely is a version of mob rule, and they can enforce whatever version of morality or immorality that they see fit, and they're not even the ones that have to dirty their hands. And that's one of the things you don't hear people really talk about is that, if you're voting, I'll be honest with you, you are directly responsible for everything that your government is doing to another human being. You put them in power. Now, granted, you could say that, well, they would have been elected anyway if only one person voted. You are legitimizing their rule over everyone. If you're basically giving them the power, at least the illusion of the power, the acceptance of the outcome. So just like if you go to the casino and you throw a couple bucks in the slot machine, you accept the outcome, whether it's favorable or disfavorable. In my opinion, I don't put anything in the slot machine. That way, I don't have to worry about it. Unfortunately, I'm still subject to what everyone else is doing, and that's the shitty part of this whole deal.
Yeah, and then the caveat is you went ahead and cast that, and your person won. Well, now next time around, your person doesn't win, and you've got the opponent, and you're cursing everybody who voted for them because you feel that you're being violated.
Yeah, every power that your guy or gal uses will be used against you in the next go round when someone you do not want takes the reins. So you ask yourself, do I want someone else having this power? We go into a frenzy every 4 years. God, we can't let Hillary get it because of this, or we can't let Trump get it because of this. Why do you let them have that much power and that much control over your lives? We don't have, or have not had historically, any good presidents.
And
The odds are against us here.
I'll even take that and harken back to what we were talking about in the beginning of the episode. Folks will get their wall. There are these emergency powers. Yeah. And wait till it's somebody you don't want and they use emergency powers for something you feel is absurd or completely abject. Well, it was okay now, so guess what? If the doors are open, it's going to be okay then.
Yeah, and God knows what it'll be used for then. So I'm glad you brought that up. That actually is another good question. What about the prevention of movement?
Well, there shouldn't be a prevention of movement other than the movement over folks' private property.
Absolutely, and that's the caveat, that P word, private property. I agree with that 100%. If I went on, obviously, if I went in your house and I boarded all your doors and windows shut and prevented you from moving, I'm absolutely aggressing against you. I haven't attacked you. I don't have a gun. I'm not physically fighting you, but I am absolutely aggressing against you. And I would make the argument that anyone that is crossing public property, which again should not exist in and of itself, anyone that is preventing that movement is in violation of this principle.
In clarification in the aspect of public property, meaning owned by government.
Right, which shouldn't exist in and of itself.
Right.
Absolutely. Was there anything else you wanted to throw in non-aggression?
No, I think we're good there.
All right, the last one, probably the most important, but the one we have to spend the least amount of time in because there's nothing really controversial in this, is voluntary interactions. Basically, as long as the interactions between a group of people are completely voluntary, there's no problem. Consent is key. Now, again, going back to, children are those that can't give consent. We already talked about that in the last episode. Not going to rehash it here. And what's interesting is the black market, or agorism, depending on which way you want to look at it. Agorism is basically another way at looking at black markets, where you have people coming together and operating and exchanging goods and services outside the regulations of a government and the laws of a government. And usually when you hear the terminology black market, you have, just like with anarchy, these pictures that come to mind of all these nefarious dealings and people in dark alleys. Unfortunately, that can be the case, but there's just as many dealings on the black markets for people getting access to experimental drugs that are not FDA approved, that they can't get in any other way. The laws create black markets, and in reality, it's been said many times that the black markets would disappear for the most part. They disappear in relation to the amount of laws and regulations that are out there.
I'd say that's accurate.
Yeah, and it makes sense. If everything's legal that is voluntary, there's no need for a black market, because there's no regulations to push people, or there's no laws to push people outside of the law. And then obviously there's no law to be outside of, other than the voluntary interactions. So again, there's not much really to say other than we already practice these things on a daily basis. A lot of us do, whether it's helping someone out or doing something for free, exchanging stuff at a farmer's market, holding a garage sale and not telling the IRS about the money that you made there, or finding $20 on the ground and not calling that income. There's all manner of day-to-day things that we do, so it's not as terrible as we like it, or as a lot of people like to make it.
It'd be the same thing as those 3 laws you broke before you left the house that day. And the other reason it's kind of a short topic in essence is because it is a conglomeration of the first two principles that we spoke of.
Absolutely. Because you have to have the first two to have this one. This is kind of built on the other two with, in my opinion, and I don't know if you would agree, self-ownership being the primary, it's the base of the triangle, and everything is built upon that.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Well, so we do agree. So I've got some questions here, and these are just kind of tease some stuff out, but why do you think people fear anarchy?
Well, first and foremost would be the pre you know predisposed notions that people have formed in their minds from media, from television, from movies, when they use an anarchist in reporting a news story, they use one in a movie, or in a TV show where this individual is portrayed as destroying property, causing mass mayhem, and basically a totally unethical, immoral individual. The other one would be people fear to rule themselves. They feel the need for some form of overseer to be conducting parts of their lives, and the idea that they would be all on their own to provide for themselves would scare them to death.
Well, do you think it's more or less like a philosophical fear of the unknown? Or do you think, and it doesn't have to be either or these, I mean, it could be both, definitely. Like for me, when I look at it, obviously there's that caricature that comes to mind. We talked about it in the first episode, guy in a ski mask, maybe or not, holding a flaming Molotov cocktail, getting ready to destroy property. But the chaos, the lawlessness, the disorder, all these appeals that you see in the descriptions, for me, I look at it as there's this philosophical fear of the unknown. And when I say philosophical, it's something we're conjuring in our mind, this unknown. We have this structure that surrounds us and permeates everything we do, whether it's the shows that you watch, they're regulated by the FCC, whether it be the food that you eat that's regulated by the FDA, the cars you drive, EPA, NHTSA. You can't do anything that is not regulated.
It would definitely be a combination of things. And then I would add a third one in there, is you notice how I harp a lot about the welfare state. The other one would be as people are dependent upon it for their living.
Yeah, no, that's true. I would absolutely agree with that. They have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo,
and
as
maintaining the group that'll give them that.
One of the other things that you kind of lead me to think of as well is this fear or absolution of responsibility. People have this fear, I think, of being the responsible party for their own lives. They want to be able to wash their hands of what's going on. Well, I voted for a guy that's supposed to be taking care of this. I did everything I can. This is all I can do as a human being, is just vote for the right person and let them manage my affairs. Do you think there's anything to that?
Absolutely. For the simple fact, my own conspiratorial thought on this is by design. I mean, if you go from years and years ago where folks were responsible for educating their own children, taking care of their own affairs, as far as putting their money in the bank, there wasn't necessarily a regulatory effect of that. There was an individual who was deemed trustworthy, and they were in essence a banker, and went ahead and made loans to folks and these types of things, but there was not government oversight over that. So essentially you were responsible for your own money. There was no FDIC to back that up. You go back days of hunting and scavenging for your own food, when you used to be able to hunt pretty much anywhere you wanted to go ahead and grab a meal, and now you need licenses and everything else, and you need a proper land to do it on, and blah, blah, blah. And then we could go into the weapons needed and all the crap that goes along with that. And as you can see, it's a nightmare because all that has been controlled. In some areas you can't even have a proper garden, or it can only be so big. so you don't have a way to sustain yourself. It's essentially been taken out of your wheelhouse, and they want to be part of that. They want to be part of any of those transactions or productions where you would be able to, survive all on your own.
Well, I would also make the argument that anything you do to be self-sustaining takes them out of the tax equation because you're no longer transacting.
That's what I'm talking about, and that's what some of those laws actually directly address. They'll go ahead and tie that into interstate commerce, and even when it's not interstate, they tend to link it there anyway in some weird, convoluted way.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting when you think about it like that. So it sounds like, and I'm going to agree with you, you're arguing that education has had, or at least state-run education, has had a pretty substantial role in establishing their domination.
Oh, yeah. Just on the topic of education, I would argue the idea has been to get at the youth, and the left, the left has done this really well. All you got to do is read some of these history textbooks, and I'm not saying it's a dumb idea. I just, if any evil group, we could go so far as Hitler. I mean, he knew that the best way to bring up a population that he wanted was to start with the youth and work its way up.
Yeah, all you got to do is tell people to imagine the worst people in the world that you can think of, like your most hated, vilified group, whatever that is. How would you feel about them being in charge of your child's education? And they would go, well, no, God, no, I would never want that. You just kind of raise an eyebrow and go, do you get where we're coming from here, guys?
Well, with the public education system, those ideals will wax and wane with whatever group happens to hold whatever seat for however long, and
Right.
that will determine the script that your kids have been read.
Right. And I guess that's one of the benefits of the large monolithic governmental bureaucracy is that it moves so slow that even with the waxing and waning of, presidents that are nominating different directors of educations, that it moves so sluggishly that there's no real monumental shift. It's all veering left.
Well, I guess the caveat in that one, because it is kind of multi-tiered on how that would operate. You have the Department of Education, which I would argue is, usually pretty much left, and then you also have the fact that it is highly unionized. That also lends to that, so that could have the lag or carryover effect past the waxing and waning of powers that are higher than that.
It's like a really shitty NASCAR race. It's always going left. Not that I would argue that there's a such thing as a good NASCAR race, but those of you that are fans, don't take offense. Now, one of the interesting things that I wanted to close it out with is the more I look at this, the more this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And what I mean by that is that they increase the amount of laws, which of course increases pushback, increases the amount of people that become criminals. And it justifies their existence. They can sit there and say, see, look how many lawbreakers there are. See how violent these people are. Aren't you glad we're here? It's almost like they're creating problems to justify the solutions that they already have in place. It's kind of terrifying when you think about it. But as always, guys, I do want to thank you for giving us another opportunity to spend some time with you. We appreciate it greatly. We will have a link to our website, porcupinepov.com, in the show notes for you to use for comments and an opportunity to subscribe to receive our blog articles. We have Facebook pages and YouTube pages under the name of Porcupine Perspective. Give us a follow, subscription, or like, and you can join in on the commentary. Now, we can't do this without you, and your 5-star reviews and subscriptions help keep us going. If you like what you're hearing, do us a favor, click those buttons. Remember, you're only as free as you allow your own mind to be, And as always, Robert and I wish you both.
Always looking back over your shoulder, waiting around to make your move. Don't hold back, come on and get down to it. Live your life the way that you wanna.